Hello everyone, and welcome to Mr. This is Central America, and here is El Salvador. Now let's take a little look, shall we? As the age of ice ended, waves of migratory tribes traveled down the Americas, and a number of them decided to stay in what would one day be El Salvador, a land of jungle and volcanoes. Despite their hostile environs, the people cultivated maize, squash, and beans, and civilization started. A place called Chalchuapa was advancing very impressively, but was stopped stone dead in its tracks by the eruption of Ilopango around 250 AD. Some centuries later, civilization began picking up steam again under the influence of Maya culture. Around the year 800, a people called People from Mexico conquered the region's Maya and set up their own cities and came to dominate the land, selling their cocoa beans from Costa Rica to Aztec markets up north. Like other nations of Mesoamerica, the Pipil worshipped the feathered serpent and practiced human sacrifice. The Spanish conquistador Pedro de Alvarado began the conquest of the country in the 1520s, and while the natives fought fiercely, their cotton armor was no match for Toledo's steel, and the Spaniards established the capital, which, like the nation itself, was named after Christ the Savior, El Salvador. Now, the Spanish were not exactly Christ-like in forcing the natives to toil on their plantations, but they had only recently thrown off Moorish chains, and were not exactly sold on the whole love and peace thing as a viable philosophy. Since there isn't much gold in El Salvador, the country's economy was dependent on agriculture, particularly indigo, which would top its exports for centuries. And with the centuries came new ideas, Enlightenment ideas of revolution, which would set Spanish America ablaze in the early 19th century, hitting El Salvador in 1811 with the priest José Matías Delgado ringing his church's bells and calling for freedom. Independence arrived in 1821, but this didn't exactly bring about times of lollipops and rainbows. Between 1841 and 1890, El Salvador fought once against Nicaragua, 4 times against Honduras, and 5 times against Guatemala, while experiencing 13 military coups. Meanwhile, indigo exports subsided in favor of coffee, as usual enriching just a few people. Naturally, society was frustrated and angry, and rebellions arose, which the government suppressed, often brutally. When farmers in the West provinces revolted in 1932, the government under dictator Maximiliano Hernández Martínez sent the army to slaughter the insurgents, killing over 10,000 people. Years later, a man who had lost his father in the massacre stabbed the dictator to death. Unsurprisingly, many Salvadorans fled their country and began living on unoccupied plots of land in Honduras. Then Honduras decided it wanted to occupy those plots and started kicking Salvadorans out. So El Salvador's army invaded Honduras in the Football War, named after the frequent skirmishes between the two nations' fans at soccer matches. After 4 days, the OAS stepped in to stop it, but still the tension and trouble continued, with another military coup in 1979, leading to a 12-year civil war between the government and left-wing guerrillas, a terrible time of torture, death squads, and disappearances, with champion of the poor, Archbishop Oscar Romero, bravely calling for an end to the violence, only to be shot dead during Mass. He was canonized as a saint by Pope Francis in 2018. The war left about 75,000 people dead before it ended in 1992. Reforms were passed and the economy began to improve, and El Salvador today has a medium level of human development, meaning improvements are still needed, but they are happening. And while El Salvador has the highest homicide rate in the world, due largely to violence from gangs like MS-13, the number is decreasing, and let's hope it dwindles to 0. So that's it for El Salvador, and that's all from me for now. Bye-bye!